In the flickering, unsteady candlelight, my mother stood in his arms. Her face was turned up toward his, her eyes closed, burning with a silent, fervent passion I had never seen before. A passion that was never for my father, but for his best friend. He leaned down, his silhouette merging with hers in the dancing shadows, and they kissed. It wasn't a fleeting peck or a friendly gesture. It was a real kiss, deep and long and full of a secret history that I was suddenly, brutally a part of. In that single, shattering moment, the world I knew, the solid ground of my childhood, the very concept of family I had trusted, and the little girl I was, all fractured and ceased to exist. Hello everyone, and welcome. What you just heard is the precise moment an 11-year-old's life was irrevocably torn apart. Today's story is a deep and intimate journey through the quiet devastation of betrayal and the unexpected, winding path to healing that followed. It is a story about the invisible cracks that form in a family, the silences that scream louder than any argument, and the kind of love that, sometimes, against all odds, finds a way to fill those empty spaces. This is a journey that requires patience, so settle in. Before we begin, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you don't miss out on more stories that truly touch the heart. Now, let's begin. The world of an 11-year-old is a fragile, crystalline thing. Mine was a snow globe, a perfect, self-contained universe built on the scent of my mother's vanilla perfume, the rumbling sound of my father's deep laugh, and the comforting warmth of the fireplace on cold New England winter evenings. Our house, a cozy two-story colonial with blue shutters and a slightly crooked porch swing, was my entire world. In that universe, my family was the sun, the moon, and all the constellations combined. My father, David, was the steady gravity. My mother, Sarah, was the gentle atmosphere, and I, Lily, was the cherished inhabitant, safe and adored. I remember those evenings with a clarity that now feels like a physical ache. The four of us, Mom, Dad, Grandpa Sam, and me, would gather in the living room. The fire would crackle and spit embers, casting long dancing shadows on the walls that I used to imagine were friendly ghosts. I'd be curled up on my mother's lap, her favorite cashmere throw blanket tucked around me, my head resting against her chest where I could feel the steady, reassuring rhythm of her heartbeat. She would smell of vanilla and lavender, a scent that for me was synonymous with safety and unconditional love. My father would be in his favorite worn leather armchair, a history book open on his lap, though he rarely read. Instead, he'd listen to Grandpa Sam, my mother's father, tell his grand, rambling fairy tales. Dad would interject with playful, booming corrections, adding his own dramatic flair. "No, Sam, the dragon had 3 heads, not 2. You're forgetting the one that breathed bubblegum and smelled faintly of cinnamon." My mother would laugh at this, a sound like wind chimes on a warm spring day, her eyes sparkling with a simple, unadulterated joy that lit up the entire room, chasing away the phantom shadows from the fire. In those moments, nestled in the protective cocoon of their shared love, I believed with the unwavering, absolute faith of a child that my family was immutable, a perfect, unbreakable circle. But life, as I would learn with crushing finality, is not a fairy tale. Fairy tales have clear villains and heroes, light and dark. Real life is a vast, unforgiving landscape of shifting gray, where the people you love most, the very architects of your world, can also be the ones who hand you the detonator. The changes didn't arrive with a thunderclap or a dramatic confrontation. They crept in silently, insidiously, like a slow frost creeping across a window pane, so gradual you don't notice the chill until you can no longer see clearly through the glass. It began with my father. His architectural firm, he said, was taking on a massive new project. The late nights at the office, once a rarity, became a regular occurrence. The lingering, bone-crushing hugs he used to give me when he came home, the ones that made me feel like the most precious thing in the world, were replaced by hurried, distracted pecks on the forehead as he rushed past, his phone already pressed to his ear, his mind miles away in a world of blueprints and deadlines. The shared dinners, once the anchor of our day, became sporadic. More often than not, his chair at the head of the table sat empty, a silent testament to his growing absence. My mother began to change too, fading in plain sight. She started spending long stretches of time standing by the living room window, her gaze lost somewhere in the sprawling skeletal branches of the old oak tree in our front yard. Her eyes, once so full of light and laughter, became vacant, as if she were watching a sad movie that only she could see. Our family meals, when we had them, grew quieter. The easy, flowing laughter that once filled our home dwindled until it was a mere echo, a ghost of what used to be. I didn't have the words for it then, but I could feel the shift in the very air I breathed. It was a heaviness, a palpable tension that settled over our house like a thick shroud of fog. I saw it in the way my parents' eyes would meet for a split second across the room and then quickly dart away, as if looking at each other was too painful. I saw it in the way their hands would brush past each other in the hallway without touching, a sudden, awkward retraction of contact. Grandpa Sam, my rock, seemed to feel it too. He still visited every Saturday, his pockets still miraculously full of peppermints for me and old stories to tell. But his smiles didn't quite reach his kind, crinkly eyes anymore. His voice, once booming with life and tall tales, was quieter, slower, as if the weight of the unspoken sadness in our home was a physical burden he was forced to help carry. He'd look from my mother's pale face to my father's empty chair, and a shadow would pass over his own features. I tried, in my own desperate, childish way, to be the glue that held us together. I became the perfect, invisible daughter. I made my bed without being asked, the corners tucked in with military precision. I practiced my piano lessons until my fingers ached, and the melody of a somber Chopin piece filled the quiet house. I smiled until my cheeks hurt, a bright, brittle smile that felt like a mask. I clung to the tattered remnants of our old life. The afternoons I spent riding my bike in endless circles on the driveway. The rare occasions Mom and I would bake cookies in a kitchen thick with silence. The startling warmth of Dad's hand on my shoulder when he'd sneak up behind me, a fleeting ghost of his old self. If I was good enough, I told myself, a frantic mantra in my head. If I smiled more, if I caused no trouble, maybe everything would click back into place. Maybe the sun would shine again in our foggy house. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house was utterly still, I could hear it. A faint, almost imperceptible cracking sound, not from the house settling, but from something deeper. It was like the sound of ice splintering on a frozen lake, a sound that promised a dangerous thaw. From the outside, the Miller family was still a perfect picture in a perfect frame, but inside, the cracks were spreading, silent and colorless, spiderwebbing through the very foundation of everything I held dear. I would hug my teddy bear Barnaby, his button eyes my only confidants, and bury my face in his worn, matted fur. I would pray with all the might a little girl could muster that the good things wouldn't disappear forever. I didn't know then that once cracks like that begin to form, they don't stop. They grow and spread in the darkness, seeking the weakest points until the entire structure collapses from within. The arrival of Alex, my father's best friend since college and my honorary uncle, was at first a welcome disruption, a splash of vibrant color in our monochrome world. Where my father's presence had become a hollow void, Alex's was a loud, joyful, and utterly captivating force. He always had a terrible pun or a funny story on the tip of his tongue and a mischievous twinkle in his hazel eyes. He could turn a boring, gray Saturday afternoon into a grand adventure, teaching me how to play a sneaky game of chess, helping me launch a kite into the windy meadow behind our house, or showing me how to fix my bike chain with grease-stained, capable hands. My mother, Sarah, seemed to bloom in his presence, like a flower turning toward a new sun. Her laughter, which had become so painfully rare, returned in full force whenever Alex was around. I remember one particular afternoon with searing, bittersweet clarity. Mom was in the kitchen, attempting to bake a lemon meringue pie, and Alex was leaning against the counter, ostensibly there to fix a leaky faucet my father had been meaning to get to for weeks. He accidentally flicked a bit of flour onto her nose. She gasped in mock horror, then laughed, a genuine, carefree, musical laugh that I hadn't heard in months. She pretended to be angry, grabbing a dish towel and playfully swatting him with it. They ended up in a light-hearted chase around the kitchen island, their laughter echoing through the silent house, a sound so beautiful and so foreign it almost hurt to hear. I laughed with them, a child delighted by any sign of happiness, thinking it was just the kind of innocent, boisterous fun that close family friends shared. But as the weeks bled into months, Alex's presence became a constant, a fixture in our home. My father was traveling more and more for work, a big project in Boston, a conference in Chicago, and Alex was always there, ready to fill the space he left behind. He'd help Mom with the yard work, his strong arms easily pushing the lawnmower. He'd fix things around the house, his toolbox a familiar sight on our kitchen counter. He even started accompanying her on grocery runs. I started to notice things, small, seemingly insignificant things that, when added up, painted a disturbing picture. The way Alex's hand would linger on the small of my mother's back for just a second too long when he was helping her with her coat. The way their eyes would meet across the dinner table, holding a gaze that felt charged with a secret language I didn't understand. It wasn't the comfortable, familiar way my dad looked at my mom. It was something else, something intense and secretive that made a strange, cold feeling coil in the pit of my stomach. One evening, I was curled up on the sofa, pretending to read while they were talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, a soft, intimate murmur, punctuated by my mother's soft, breathy giggles. I risked a glance over the top of my book. The pale yellow light from the lamp above the sink cast them in a warm, private glow. They were standing very close, their shoulders almost touching, and Mom tilted her head, leaning in as Alex whispered something in her ear. Her whole body shook with silent laughter. In that moment, watching them share that secret space, I felt like an intruder in my own home. The cold feeling in my chest intensified, becoming a dull ache. I put my book down, hugged Barnaby tighter, and told myself again and again that I was imagining things, that I was being silly. This was just how good friends acted. But a seed of doubt had been planted in the fertile soil of my 11-year-old heart, and it was beginning to take root, its tendrils wrapping around everything I thought I knew. The signs became louder, harder to ignore, impossible to explain away. I noticed my mother's new habit of texting late into the night, her face illuminated by the phone's blue glow, a small, secretive smile playing on her lips as her fingers flew across the screen. If I walked into the room unexpectedly, she'd jump, quickly lock her phone, and slip it into her pocket, her movements furtive and guilty. "Just a friend from work, honey," she'd say, her eyes avoiding mine, a blush creeping up her neck. The name Alex started to replace the word sweetheart in her casual speech when she was on the phone, a Freudian slip she would quickly correct, her laughter a little too loud, but not before I heard it. Every secretive text, every hushed phone call that ended abruptly when I entered a room, every lingering glance was a tiny, sharp splinter lodging itself deeper into my heart, creating a festering wound of suspicion. I began to withdraw, to retreat into a fortress of silence. I built a wall around myself, brick by silent, resentful brick. Where I once eagerly showed my parents my schoolwork, my gold stars and A+, I now mumbled one-word answers and retreated to the solitude of my room. I avoided my mother's touch, flinching away from the hugs that once felt like the safest place on earth. Her hands, once my harbor, now felt like a betrayal. The emotional distance between my parents became a vast, unbridgeable chasm. One evening at dinner, Dad, home for a rare 2-day stretch, asked Mom about a business trip he had coming up next month. She looked up, startled, her fork clattering against her plate, as if pulled from a deep, distant thought. "Oh, yes, I'll get things sorted," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. I saw my father's brow furrow for a split second, a flicker of confusion and hurt in his tired eyes, before his expression smoothed over into that now familiar mask of weary indifference. The rest of the meal was consumed in a silence so profound that the clinking of our forks against the china sounded like tiny, angry gunshots. I looked from my mother's averted face to my father's closed one, two strangers sitting at the same table, and I, their child, was trapped in the lonely, desolate, and freezing space between them. That night, I pulled the covers up to my chin and squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to cry, telling myself big girls didn't cry. But the tears came anyway, silent, hot, angry tears that soaked my pillow. They weren't tears for a scraped knee or a bad grade. They were tears for the slow, agonizing, quiet death of my family, for the horrifying realization that the people I loved most in the world were slipping away from me, from each other, and I was utterly, completely helpless to stop them. We're now at the turning point of Lily's story, a moment that will change her world forever. It's a stark reminder of how fragile a child's perception of safety can be and how quickly it can be shattered. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you understand that feeling of a world turning upside down, press the number 1 in the comments below. Let's continue this difficult but important journey. The night it all fell apart, it was raining. Not a gentle spring shower, but a cold, relentless November downpour that had started in the afternoon and, by evening, had turned the sky into a bruised, angry, and churning canvas of purple and gray. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows in their frames and making the old house groan and creak around us. The atmosphere inside was just as bleak and stormy. Dad had called earlier, his voice tinny and distant, to say his flight out of Chicago had been canceled due to the storm. He'd be stuck there for another night. My mother had just hummed a flat, tired affirmative on the phone, her voice devoid of any disappointment. Dinner was a somber, silent affair. Just as we were finishing our plates, the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged us into total disorienting darkness. The power was out for the whole block. My mother sighed, a sound of pure, bone-deep exhaustion, and fumbled in a kitchen drawer for candles and a lighter. The flickering yellow light threw long, dancing, distorted shadows on the walls, making the familiar room feel eerie and strange, like a scene from a horror movie. I retreated to a corner of the sofa, hugging Barnaby to my chest, a knot of nameless unease tightening in my stomach. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. 3 quick, sharp, confident knocks, a rhythm I knew all too well. It was Alex's signature knock. Mom glanced at me, her face unreadable in the wavering candlelight. "I'll get it," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too cheerful. On the porch stood Alex, his raincoat dripping onto the welcome mat, a powerful flashlight in his hand, cutting a bright swath through the gloom. "Heard the power went out," he said, his breath pluming like smoke in the cold air. "Figured you and the little squirt might need a hand." He smiled, and my mother smiled back, a genuine, radiant, relieved smile that I hadn't seen her give my father in what felt like a lifetime. He came in, bringing the smell of rain and cold night air with him, stamping his boots on the mat. They lit more candles together, their hands brushing as they worked, their movements synchronized and familiar. They settled on the sofa, much closer than they needed to be, and their voices dropped to hushed, intimate whispers. They giggled like school children sharing a forbidden secret. I tried to focus on an old copy of The Secret Garden, but the words swam and blurred before my eyes. My senses were on high alert, every nerve ending tingling with a dreadful anticipation. I was listening, waiting, though I didn't know for what. After what felt like an eternity of their soft murmuring, Mom stood up. "I think there are more candles in the kitchen cabinet," she announced to the room. Alex followed her immediately. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back as they walked out of the living room, a gesture that was meant to look casual and supportive, but felt possessive, intimate, and proprietary. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I couldn't stand it anymore. The air felt thick, suffocating. After waiting a few minutes, my own heart hammering a counter rhythm to the rain against the roof, I slid off the sofa, my socked feet silent on the hardwood floor. "I'm going to get some water," I mumbled to no one in particular, my voice sounding small and strange in the quiet room. The hallway was dark, save for the flickering golden light spilling from the kitchen doorway. As I got closer, I heard their whispers again. My mother's voice, soft and breathy, almost a sigh. Then Alex's, a low, rumbling chuckle, followed by a deep sigh of his own. I held my breath, my body frozen in the shadows, and peered through the crack of the slightly ajar kitchen door. And then my world didn't just crack. It imploded. In the wavering golden candlelight that made the scene look both holy and profane, my mother was in Alex's arms. Her head was tilted back, her eyes closed, a look of pure, unadulterated bliss on her face. Alex leaned down, his expression one of intense, hungry adoration, and their lips met. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate, consuming kiss, the kind I had only ever seen in grown-up movies, the kind I hadn't seen my parents share in years, if ever. A small, strangled gasp escaped my lips, a sound I couldn't hold back. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth as if to physically stop the horror from spilling out. The glass of water I had been reaching for on a small hallway table slipped from my trembling, numb fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent, waiting house. They sprang apart as if electrocuted, their faces a mask of pure, abject horror. The moment my mother's wide, terrified, guilty eyes met mine across the dimly lit space, the world seemed to stop spinning. Her face went deathly pale, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Alex looked utterly panicked, taking a step back as if he'd been burned, his hands held up in a useless gesture of surrender. I didn't wait to hear their lies, their excuses, their frantic explanations. A primal instinct took over. I turned and fled. I ran up the stairs, my bare feet pounding on the wooden steps, the sound a frantic drumbeat of my shattered heart. I slammed my bedroom door shut, the sound a definitive, explosive end to my childhood, and slid down against it, my back pressed against the cold, hard wood as if it could protect me. I drew my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, trying to physically hold myself together as my small body was racked with violent, silent sobs that tore through me. Outside the door, my mother's frantic knocks and her choked, pleading voice were a muffled, distant sound, a language I no longer understood. "Lily, honey, please, open the door." "Please, baby, I'm so sorry." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I bit down hard on my lip, tasting the coppery tang of blood, and curled into a tighter ball, wishing I could simply shrink and disappear, to dissolve into nothingness. The night stretched on, an endless, black expanse of darkness and misery. The candles downstairs eventually burned out, leaving only the relentless sound of the rain and the memory of that kiss, playing over and over and over in my mind like a horror film on a sickening loop. When the first gray, unforgiving light of dawn crept through my window, I was still awake, my eyes dry and burning. I had cried all my tears. Something inside me, that fragile, crystalline world of childhood, had been shattered into a million irreparable, razor-sharp pieces. My innocence, my faith, my fundamental sense of security, it was all gone, destroyed in the treacherous flicker of a candle flame. The next morning, my father came home, cheerful and oblivious, his suitcase rolling on the wet porch. I heard the front door opening and his happy call, "I'm home." I stayed in my room, burying my face in Barnaby's soft fur, pretending to be asleep. Breakfast was a masterclass in denial and tension. Mom served eggs and toast as if nothing had happened, her hands trembling slightly, her face a pale, strained mask. Dad, oblivious, talked about the conference in Chicago, about the terrible weather. No one looked at each other. I felt invisible, a ghost at my own family's table, the silence a physical entity, a suffocating weight that pressed down on us all. In the days that followed, our house became a mausoleum, a museum of a family that used to be. We were a family of ghosts, haunting the same space but never truly connecting, each of us trapped in our own private bubble of misery. Dad tried, in his own clumsy way. He'd suggest a movie night or a board game, but Mom would always have a headache or work to do, her movements stiff and guarded around him. I saw Dad sitting on the porch alone more and more, his coffee growing cold in his hands, his face etched with a confusion and a deep, lonely sadness he couldn't name. He knew something was terribly wrong. He just didn't know the name of the monster that was living in our house. And I, the unwilling keeper of the terrible secret, felt the weight of it crushing me day by silent, agonizing day. I stopped hoping for a miracle. I understood now, with the cold, hard certainty of a disillusioned adult, that some things, once broken, could never be put back together again. It was my Grandpa Sam who saw through the charade, who refused to participate in the silent play we were all acting in. He was a man of few words, but deep, profound wisdom. A man who believed that presence was more powerful than platitudes. He started visiting more often, his gentle, observant eyes taking in the strained silence, my mother's haunted expression, my father's bewildered pain, and my own complete retreat into myself. One crisp autumn afternoon, he found me sitting on the back steps, staring blankly at the dying garden. He sat down beside me, not saying a word, just being there, a solid, warm presence in my cold, lonely world. After a long, comfortable silence, I turned to him, my voice a small, broken whisper I hardly recognized as my own. "Grandpa, why does it feel like everyone is so far away, even when they're in the same room?" His throat worked, and he pulled me into a gentle, firm hug. His hand, rough with age but incredibly warm, rubbed my back in slow, soothing circles. "Because sometimes people get so hurt, they build walls, sweet pea," he murmured into my hair. "They build walls so high they can't even see over them anymore. It's not that they don't love you, it's that they've forgotten how to love each other right." A few days later, he showed up early on a Saturday morning, a small backpack slung over his shoulder and a determined, mischievous glint in his eye. "Your parents need to sort some things out," he said, his voice low and confidential, as he knelt down to my level. "And I think you and I are in desperate need of a change of scenery. How about you and I take a little road trip to the ocean?" I hesitated for a moment, the thought of leaving the miserable safety of my room terrifying. But one look at his kind, patient, loving eyes, and I found myself nodding. Just to get away, just to breathe air that wasn't thick with secrets and lies. As we drove away from the silent house, I looked back at its sad, blue-shuttered face and felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. A tiny, fragile sliver of hope. The drive to the coast was a healing balm. With every mile that passed, the heavy atmosphere of my home seemed to dissipate. Grandpa Sam whistled old sea shanties, and the salty air that blew through the open windows felt clean, washing over me. The ocean, when we finally saw it, was vast and blue and breathtakingly beautiful. I kicked off my shoes and ran onto the sand, the cold waves chasing my bare feet. For the first time in months, I felt a release, a sense of freedom. We spent the day flying a ridiculously large, dragon-shaped kite, building a magnificent, elaborate sandcastle that was promptly and gloriously washed away by the incoming tide, and hunting for pirate treasure. A smooth, deep blue piece of sea glass that Grandpa had discovered near the dunes. We ate cold fried chicken and potato salad that tasted like the most delicious meal in the world. No one mentioned home. There was only the sun, the wind, and the rhythmic, eternal shushing of the waves. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery, impossible strokes of orange and pink and purple, we sat on a piece of driftwood, watching the spectacle. The world was quiet, save for the cry of a distant gull and the sigh of the ocean. It was then that Grandpa finally spoke of the things that mattered. "Grandpa," I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the sound of the surf, "why do grown-ups hurt each other? Why would Mom do that?" He looked out at the fiery horizon for a long time before answering. "Because grown-ups are just children who've been hurt themselves, Lily," he said softly, his voice full of a sad wisdom. "We all start out wanting to be good, wanting to love and be loved. But life gets complicated. We get tired, we get scared, and sometimes when we're scared of losing something or lonely, we do foolish, selfish things that end up hurting the very people we love the most. Does Mom still love Dad?" The question trembled on my lips. the one I was most afraid to ask. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. I can't answer for your mother, sweet pea. That's her truth to tell. But I know that feelings can be true in a moment, even if they aren't true forever. Your mother, she was lonely. She was lost. She felt invisible, and she made a terrible, heartbreaking mistake. He put his strong, warm arm around my shoulder and pulled me close. No one is perfect, Lily. Not me, not your grandmother, not your father, and not your mother, not even the people we love the most. He then told me a story about his own life, a story I'd never heard before. He told me about how he had almost lost my grandmother years ago, when my own mother was just a little girl. He was a young doctor then, so consumed by his work, so driven by his ambition, that he had started to take my grandmother for granted. He was never home, and when he was, his mind was elsewhere. I forgot, he said, his voice thick with the memory of old pain, that a family, like a garden, needs constant, daily tending. You can't just expect it to flourish on its own. One day, he came home to an empty house and a short, simple note on the kitchen table. It had taken him months of patient, humble, and sincere effort, not just words, but actions, to earn back her trust, to rebuild their life. Forgiveness, Lily, he said, looking at me, his eyes shining in the twilight, isn't about forgetting that it hurt. Lord knows, some hurts you never forget. It's about accepting that people are flawed, that they make terrible mistakes, and if you hold on to anger, the only person you're keeping in a cage is yourself. It eats you up from the inside out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, beautiful glass jar filled with tiny broken pieces of seashells in a rainbow of colors. These are the broken pieces of the ocean, he said, placing the jar in my hands. But look. Even broken, they're still beautiful, right? They still catch the light. I looked down at the shattered, colorful fragments. Just like your heart, he whispered. It's been broken into a million pieces, but it can still shine, Lily. It can still be beautiful if you choose to let it. I clutched the jar to my chest as if it were the most precious treasure in the world, a small, tangible piece of hope. That night, by a crackling bonfire on the deserted beach, he held me as I finally cried myself to sleep, lulled by the eternal sound of the waves and the steady, loving beat of his heart. I dreamed of the ocean, vast and deep and endlessly forgiving. When we returned the next afternoon, my mother was waiting on the porch, her face pale and drawn, etched with a remorse so profound it was painful to see. My father stood behind her, his own expression weary and lost. For a split second, I wanted to turn and run, to go back to the safety of the beach and my grandfather's wisdom. But then I remembered his words, and I clutched my little jar of shells. I walked towards them, my feet slow but steady. Before my mother could speak, before the apologies and tears could begin, I looked at her and said, my voice quiet but clear and stronger than I thought possible, I'm home. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something much smaller, but perhaps more important. It was a beginning. My mother broke down then, falling to her knees and pulling me into a desperate hug, her tears soaking my shoulder. And for the first time in a long, long time, we were a family, touching, however broken and fractured we were. The healing was slow, clumsy, and painful. There were no grand apologies or dramatic breakthroughs, just small, quiet, daily efforts. Mom started being more present, not just physically, but emotionally. She'd leave a warm cookie on my desk after school, or simply sit with me in silence while I did my homework, her presence a quiet, hopeful plea. I began to respond, little by little, testing the waters. A nod instead of a stony silence, a shared, fleeting smile over a silly commercial. One night, I found her standing outside my bedroom door, her hand raised as if to knock but frozen, her face a canvas of indecision and fear. I saw her shadow through the crack, and on my own accord, without any prompting, I got up and opened the door. I didn't say a word. I just wrapped my arms around her waist, and she held me, sobbing quietly into my hair. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't always need words. Sometimes it just needed an open door. Life never went back to the way it was. The perfect, unbreakable circle of my childhood was gone forever. But in its place, something new, something more real and resilient began to grow. A different kind of family, one built not on fairy tale illusions of perfection, but on the hard-won, messy truths of imperfection, pain, and the stubborn, resilient power of love. My parents became like tentative partners, navigating a fragile peace, united by their shared, fierce love for me. I don't know if my father ever learned the full truth, but I saw a new gentleness in him, a new patience with my mother's sadness. Months later, on a bright spring day, Mom and I went back to the ocean, just the two of us. We walked along the shore in a comfortable, easy silence. I ran to the water's edge and spread my arms wide, embracing the wind and the waves and the endless blue sky. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I would be okay. I had been hurt, terribly, but I had also learned to forgive. Not for her, but for me. I had found my own light, a quiet, steady, internal flame that no storm could ever fully extinguish. The sea was still there, vast and patient, singing its endless song of healing and hope. And I knew that whenever I felt lost, I could close my eyes, listen for that ancient, eternal song, and always, always find my way home. Lily's journey is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human heart. It reminds us that forgiveness is not about erasing the past or condoning a wrong, but about choosing a future free from the toxic prison of anger. It's a profound lesson in empathy and the messy, beautiful, heartbreaking reality of human relationships. Thank you for sharing this time with us and for walking alongside Lily on her difficult path. If this story has moved you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this one. And if you believe in the power of forgiveness and the possibility of new beginnings, press the number 1 in the comments. We look forward to seeing you in the next story.